So we've talked about the learning process. We've talked about problems with learning. We talked about why we need a better system, and we've kind of give you a little bit of teasers about what's coming up. But we need to get into another topic when we talk about retrieval. So what's retrieval? How does that fit into the big picture of learning, and how can we optimize that a little bit more? Well, we're going to cover that in this video. So my name is Jared. I am a certified nurse educator, a learning coach, a neonatal respiratory therapist, and nurse practitioner. And I like to help people learn a little bit better. And if you would like to learn more about this, just give me a like and a subscribe, and we'll keep these coming for you. So in this video, we need to talk about what's called cued and uncued retrieval or retrieval systems. So retrieval is the process that strengthens your memory pathways. So like I've said in other videos, is we have a piece of information here that would be a single node. We've got a piece of information here, one here, one here. And what we need to do is develop pathways and connections and create a giant web or an array that relates all this information to one another. That way, when we need this piece of information, we have different connection pathways that will get it to that information or get our mind to that information when we're trying to get that information out. And when we talk about retrieval, that is kind of like that mental process where we're going into our mind, we're thinking about that topic, and we're going down pathways to get that. And I even do this in my other videos where I said, what's an apple? Well, you have a pathway that's going to take you to the image of the apple, one that's going to take you to the taste, the color, the smell, what you can cook with it, how you cut it, the one that you had that was really good or not really good, the ones you've seen at the store, the orchard, what you're doing at the orchard, the time of year. Like there's a lot of different ways to get there. And each of those is just a new pathway. And retrieval is kind of going down those pathways and kind of reinforcing them. And the more you go, it's like a trail in a field. The more you go down that pathway, the more kind of beat down that path will get, so it's more secure and there's going to be less obstructions to that. So the more you go down that pathway, the more pathways you have to get to that single point, the better it's going to be for a whole retrieval process. And what we're trying to fix, what we covered in a previous video, is studying's a vague term. It doesn't mean that methods that we use for studying are great. A lot of methods are not optimized for actually making sure that you learn. We won't reach the outcomes we want using these study approaches that we've always used. And that performance in the real world, when you're actually going to be using information or knowledge that you take in, is a different level than when you're trying to take information so you can pass your 5-point quiz or your 50-point exam at the end of the semester. Now we have retrieval, and we have two types of retrieval when it comes down to it. We have what's called cued retrieval, and we have uncued retrieval. Both are that mental process of going into your brain and kind of thinking and trying to pull and extract that information from in there. When you're going down and doing that, it's going to strengthen those pathways and it's going to make it easier for you to reach that information the next time that you need it. And there's cued and uncued. They train at different levels, but you can't just rely just on one or the other. I like to say that we need to know both of them. There's some cued that we need to do, then we can do some uncued because they're depending on your previous knowledge, what you understand versus don't understand, where your gaps are. If you try to use one approach, it's not going to be as helpful for you in the long term or the big picture of things. So cued retrieval is essentially that. We get a cue, we get a hint, something that will point us in the direction of that pathway. So a little bit of smoke kind of going down that pathway, like there's some video games that they do that where you're tracking something and it gives you kind of like those footsteps so you can follow it and figure out where you're supposed to go. So you may be able to get a hint or a cue when you're trying to go down that memory pathway. Whether it's going to be your looking at a flashcard, something on the front of that flashcard is going to be a hint or a cue to you. If you're taking a multiple choice test, like there's information in the actual prompt or the question that's going to kind of hint you towards what the right answer is, and you're expected to take those hints and provide the correct response on that. And then they throw in distractors and all that stuff. But for the most part, we're just focusing on what the cues are to get you to the correct answer. And when you do this correctly, it reinforces, and then you're going to get a little better and better with that pathway. Uncued then is just the opposite. So this is we're kind of being plopped down in that field, and we need to get to that information without any direction. We don't have a compass. We don't have a pathway in front of us. All we know is topic, and we need to get there, make our relationships organize that information, structure that information, and do everything you need to do with that information without hints. You're pulling it all just from memory, from starting from scratch. So I like to say it's a blank paper. We're not going to talk about mind maps just yet, but we're not going to put the topic in the very center because that's just bad practice for mind maps, which is another video. But we put the information we know about it on this part, other stuff we know about it in this part. We rearrange it and move things around so we know how that information relates to one another, how are points connected, what happens on this side of the process versus this side of the process, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, how they relate, how they're interrelated, and developing those relationships. But we're not cued and we don't have hints. We have to do this all within our own mental mind or our working area in our mind. And the difference between the two, cued and uncued retrieval, is in the cued, the prompt is doing the what. It's training you to reach an output. So you get a multiple choice exam, you read the prompt or the question, and it's pointing you to get to the right answer. When we're doing uncued study or uncued training, we have to determine the what. We determine what is important, why it's important, how it relates. We're coming up with all of those things and establishing like the relationships and the context and the interconnectedness all by ourselves. Nothing's telling us to reach that point or wanting us to reach that point. And it's the big thing is about the output is if we're just passing a test, yeah, cued retrieval is probably going to work for you. But if you really want to know the topic, you want to discuss the topic, and you want to, do things with that information, you need to be able to get to that uncued level with that information. And I will say that both cued and uncued retrieval methods matter. I know some people like to teach that you can just do your uncued methods and kind of jump straight into it and go off that deep end with it. I like to say I use cued retrieval where it matters and I use uncued where it matters. So uncued retrieval is going to work when I do need to put things on flashcards. And I'm putting things on flashcard if it in flashcards are using my cued methods because I need to pass an exam first. Like I can't get out and practice unless I actually pass my tests. But there are things that I need to know and I need to memorize and just have memorized that if I don't have that information known to me or it's not engraved in my head, it will create a learning block down the road when I go to do my uncued method. So I like to use both of them. So my uncued are things like definitions, facts, numbers, normal ranges, values. Like there's some just basic general things where when somebody says it, I need to respond. Somebody says prompts it, I need to respond. So it's just making sure you know the basics, the very foundational or bottom level if we looked like a learning pyramid. So just that general information. When we get to uncued information retrieval then, or uncued facts, this is going to be our performance with that information. So how we can use it, what we're applying it to, how we can kind of go through different situations and scenarios with it. And when we get into the real world, both are going to matter. You're going to have basic facts and things memorized. Like you're going to have to know people's names. Not that that's super like a knowledge. It matters for memory necessarily, but not for knowledge. And I guess that would be our big description here: memory versus knowledge. So you need to just kind of memorize certain things. Yeah, you can't get around that. But we also need to know how to apply and use that information in different situations. And the big problem that even I fell into is that we often use the wrong tool for the job. So we look at what worked last time and we just keep trying to apply that to the next situation, and the situation changes, but we still try to use the same tool. And at the end of the day, we are just unsuccessful and we end up in a bad situation. One of the problems that we can get into when we use a lot of just cued retrieval instead of going to our uncued retrieval then is we end up kind of dependent on our cues or our prompting. And you get really good when you are given those specific cues to that information. And this is what I say with like flashcards is I learn the flashcards and I get them memorized. I can tell you what's on the flashcard. I can tell you what's anything that's like outstanding with the flashcard. Like if I accidentally like made a smudge on something, like I memorize that. Like I can tell you it says like over this and on this side of this, there's a little mark there that accidentally got put there because my cat did something and blah blah blah. And I have that memorized. That doesn't matter to the grand scheme of like my knowledge of the topic, but that's just how memory works. I have it memorized. And real world situations are going to put you in scenarios where you need to use both of those. So we're going to make sure we're not just depending on prompts because we need to have a working memory and a working knowledge of these situations. And they all fit and they have their place on this kind of greater ladder of, or this toolbox that we're going to develop in terms of learning. So we do our cued retrieval things, our flashcards, our practice problems, practice quizzes, anything like that. And it's giving us a hint to reach that solution that we want it to get, that the prompt wants you to reach. Uncueds are a little different. We're going to talk about this when we talk more about things like brain dumping, mind maps, or different like writing assignments and type like that. But for now, we're just going to kind of leave it on there. So when we're doing our cued retrieval, we want to make sure that we're doing it the correct way. So if we're doing flashcards or anything, we want to make sure that we're thinking about what the response is on the back. We're not cheating, like being like, oh, I think it's this one. I think it's this one. Yeah, that's it. Definitely, that's it. So we're being honest if we know that information or not. We're putting flashcards we know out of our mind because they're memorized. We're going to retire things that need retired. And we're going to verify that information right away to know if we're right or wrong. If we do this appropriately and correctly, it should get easy. It should get easy quickly because we're going to use flashcards appropriately just for those things that they need to be used for, which will be another video. We'll talk about what is flashcard worthy and what's not. And remember that the prompt's just the trigger. It's not a script, because when we end up doing memorization things with like flashcards or anything like that, it can become memorized like a script. Just like I said, I think the last video when we talked about re-listening to lectures. Like I re-listened to this one 16-hour lecture at least like, gosh, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 times. And it's like I had the script memorized. Like if you needed me to sit down and like fill in for a lecture, I could go out and recite that lecture, but I hope nobody asked me any questions, because one, oddball, curveball coming at me, I wouldn't have been able to answer anything with that one. So yeah, when we use our cued retrieval, we're going to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And with our uncued retrieval, we're truly going to work without a prompt. We're going to have a goal when we go and write this. So it's not like true blank paper. Like we're going to have a question that we're trying to answer when we go and we do our uncued practices with that. It's not just like, hey, let's start at blank 0 nowhere and get to 100. We have an idea of what we want to talk about. It's just all the information out there on it is stuff we need to pull out and put into writing and put onto paper and organize it and do that. And these are going to work across different topics, so they can relate, they can get messy, they can get very big. And that's why I think they do have a place and they are good for your true understanding. But there's going to be roadblocks that are going to come up because there's something you may have been missing at that foundational level. And without filling in that foundational fact, your big uncued practices are going to be roadblocked and you're going to hit a wall. So some warning signs that you may see when you're trying to do these new systems. The biggest one that everyone always does, and this applies not just to like developing a learning system, but a lot of any type of like behavior changes that you're trying to make. Number one is falling back into old habits. So you start doing what you used to do, not because you knew it was effective, but it was familiar. And being familiar is being comfortable. So you want to go back to what was comfortable and familiar, even though you know it didn't work and it wasn't effective. So watch out for falling back into old habits. Make sure you're not just rereading, re-listening to lectures, recopying notes or anything, because we know that that doesn't work. It's not going to get you any more knowledge on that information or not. It might get you a little familiar with some topics. There may be something out there, some piece of information or data on there that's going to be into your mind now, but for the most part, it's not going to help get you to that understanding level that you need to get to. We're going to use different strategies. We're going to look at different retrieval types, and we're going to be using all of these things, but we're not going to stick with just one. We're always looking for feedback on our methods. And we're going to talk to you very soon. I promise this one's coming up soon. This is just the foundational stuff we got to get out of the way. But how we can use AI to get in there and get that feedback right away, so we know that we're doing things the way that we need to do. And make sure that we're not focusing on just compliance with things. So if we are doing flashcards, we're not using the wrong goalpost or metric for that. We're not looking at hours of rewriting notes, or how long our study sessions were, or how many flashcards we built, or how many we went over. Like, we're done when we're done and we feel comfortable with that topic. We need to revisit information at different intervals to make sure we're doing our spaced repetition correctly. But for the most part, we're not going to use ineffective measures that aren't going to show us any outcome. So we're not thinking about how long I studied, how many flashcards I did, how long my paper was. We're focusing on those things that we know are going to lead to outcomes that we want, which is knowing our material better. And that is the end of this one. I know it's not a big one, but we're going to go into our next, and we are going to talk about some specific things that we can do, some specific tools that we're going to put in our toolkit, how we're going to use AI to make that process go better. And if you're on the edge of the seat now and you're like, I need this information, I can't wait any longer, you can get my book down in the description. And if you've got the time and you want to stick around and learn more about this for any reason, give me a like, give me a comment, subscribe to my channel, do all that good stuff. I know we're not a big channel or anything like that, but I promise we're going to keep these coming for you, because I know there is somebody out there that's going to be able to take this information and use it and not have to suffer the same way I suffered. So again, thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you in the next one.